Hello, everybody. Sorry, I came in later than I usually do. I was watching a bear eat peanut butter. It's one of the most delightful things I've seen in quite a while. Now there's a cat on a hang glider. These people are negligent cat owners. That is awful. Never do that. Alright, TV up. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclast, the podcast. I'm your host, Michael Luck. And today's episode is a sequel to my previous investigations into the Black Goo phenomenon. The more I research this stuff, the more I find to just be strangely connected to it. It's like a overarching archetypal deep well of high strangeness. We're going to get into some of that high strangeness here in just a moment. I've had to cut some of the stuff from the script, so maybe after the script I'll go through my notes and just add in what all I've had to cut, because I found some pretty interesting stuff. It's quite odd stuff that you'd think there'd be more people talking about some of this stuff, but I don't know. Our news media has a real problem with follow-through and keeping up context of stories, etc. So before we jump into the script, just real quick, I want to issue an apology to my local smoke shop. I don't know if you guys listen very often. I certainly mention that I do a podcast just about every chance I get to these people, so they're listening. I want to issue an apology. I came in earlier today and didn't notice it at the time that I was in the shop, but as I was leaving, I noticed that my fly was down, and it was way down. And that's because the button on my pants, my shorts I was wearing, had fallen off. So it was like way open, and I don't think I exposed myself necessarily, but if that's the case, I very much apologize. Not cool. But yeah, my fly was like way open. So I'm sorry about that. I was unaware. At least my belt had held things together best they could. Yes, and I will issue an in-person apology as well in case you guys don't hear this. But anywho, and what I hope is entirely unrelated news. Yes, what you all clicked on to hear, Black Goo phenomena. The investigation continues. In our initial investigation, we mapped the contours of the Black Goo phenomena, tracing its modern expressions in ufology and conspiracy back to a deep well of historical and occult lore. We established it as an archetype, a sentient parasitic fluid representing the ultimate fear of biological and metaphysical invasion. But that first map is merely the coastline of a vast unexplored continent. The sequel plunges into the interior, seeking the source of the river. We will now venture beyond the familiar territories to excavate the forgotten mechanics of its creation, from the venomous sorcery of ancient GOO rituals, GU, GOO rituals, to the dark sexual alchemy described by 20th century occultists. We'll follow the black thread from the worm of conscience in medieval theology to the black meat of William S. Burroughs, literary junkie, and even into the startlingly real world of modern biology, where the newly discovered organism in the Great Lakes, dubbed Ship Goo 1, blurs the line between millennia-old myth and tangible scientific mystery. This is not a continuation, it is a deepening. We're here to examine the substance itself, not just as a symbol, but as a technology, a theology, and a potential new form of life. The investigation continues. Come on, let's go. Investigate. David Wong's John Dies at the End introduces the modern archetype of a sentient, pitch-black, oily liquid known as the soy sauce. This substance behaves much like a drug. It's ingested or injected, carrying a high risk of overdose. which often results in the user's body literally disintegrating or exploding. The soy sauce grants cosmic perception, enabling users to see into other dimensions, perceive shadowy entities known as shadow people, or the Hat Man, perhaps, and simultaneously witness past and future events. However, the heightened awareness comes at a steep price, as it rewires the user's consciousness in ways that often lead to insanity or being claimed by otherworldly forces, a process we'll see later on mirrored in actual, quote-unquote, real-world occultism. I say quote-unquote because real-world occultism. Your mileage may vary. The soy sauce is explicitly framed as a street drug, a heroin-like subtext. And that heroin subtext, man, that's what keeps me coming back to this black goo phenomena. I know, the irony's not lost on me. This is very strange. It's compelling. Yes, heroin-like subtext, symbolizing an addiction not just to a substance, but to an altered, often destructive reality. This is the central bargain of the black goo: cosmic perception or bodily integrity. Within the narrative, the antagonist, dubbed Shitload, that's his name, their name, you'll see, is portrayed as a high-ranking servant of the overarching villain Korok, sort of, for all intents and purposes, Lovecraftian eldritch abomination. Shitload is not a solid being, but a shimmering mass composed of millions of tiny, worm-like entities. These entities connect to cryptid phenomena such as rods or skyfish, which are often observed in low frame rate videos and embody the "We Are Legion" motif, referencing the Bible phrase about collective intelligence. To paraphrase both books, we are shitload, for we are many. Where we go one, we go all. The depiction of shitload and its constituent organisms parallels Morgellon's lore, where in microscopic invasive organisms burrow into human flesh to control the host from within, reflecting the biological manifestation of the soy sauce's influence. This collective intelligence, a swarm made sentient, is a reoccurring theme, suggesting the goo is not a singular entity, but a medium for a hive mind. The soy sauce and its effects permeate the entire series of John Dies at the End, which currently includes 4 books. The sequel, This Book is Full of Spiders, delves deeper into the Morgellons and parasitic angle, featuring invisible, multi-legged spiders that invade and control human minds. The sequel, This Book is Full of Spiders, delves deeper into the Morgellons and parasitic angle, featuring invisible, multi-legged spiders that invade and control human minds. As one character describes the horror, quote, "It's not that they're in your head, it's that they become your head," unquote. This fictional premise taps into a very real and esoteric vein of paranormal experience, where witnesses report encounters with entities that are not biological creatures, but something else entirely. These are often described as insidious spider-like beings, often referred to as astral spiders. These spider-like beings are perceived during altered states of consciousness, usually associated with DMT, or in the aftermath of UFO encounters. Unlike the giant spiders of folklore, lest I forget, Benadryl trips as well. Can't forget those. Unlike the giant spiders of folklore, these entities are small, often invisible, and their horror lies in their perceived function as agents of control or observation. Their nature is consistently described as non-biological, perceived as quote-unquote mechanical or crystalline in construction, moving with an unnatural, stuttering precision that defies the fluidity of organic life. This reinforces the idea that they're not simply undiscovered cryptids, but rather technological or energetic constructs, the mobile, interactive probes of a larger, unseen system. Subsequent books in the series explore themes of shape-shifting mimics capable of replacing individuals and leaving behind black residue, as well as glitched realities caused by interactions with extra-dimensional fluids. I got more extra-dimensional fluids coming your way, so bring a poncho. This narrative arc synthesizes various elements of black goo lore, portraying the substance as a reality-warping agent that blurs the boundaries between biological addiction, sentient artificial intelligence, and metaphysical invasion. It's a liquid technology that rewrites the user's very existence. This modern fictional archetype finds a startling echo in the metaphorical work of William S. Burroughs. Burroughs', quote, black meat of the giant centipede, unquote, from Naked Lunch, serves as a powerful allegory for heroin addiction. This, alongside and in addition to the loathsome and addictive biological byproduct of alien creatures repeatedly referred to in the works as mugwumpjism. But for the purposes of our current investigations, I've decided to streamline things by focusing our attention on the former metaphorical substance as opposed to the latter. The latter being mugwumpjism. He describes addiction not as a choice, but as a cellular level colonization. The junk, the substance, rewires the host's biology and consciousness from the inside out. The body becomes a mere vessel for the hunger of the drug. Burroughs wrote, quote, the junk virus is public health problem number 1 in the Western world, unquote. This metaphor aligns perfectly with the black goo's function as a metabolic takeover agent, whether in alien abduction narratives or occult traditions. The soy sauce is simply Burroughs' black meat made literal, a substance that offers a terrifying form of enlightenment at the cost of self. What makes this metaphor even more compelling, particularly when viewed through the lens of conspiracy literature and fringe historical accounts, is how often it converges, almost unexpectedly, with narratives involving parasitic organisms, insects, and deliberate attempts at biological or psychological control. An especially strange and frequently overlooked example appears in the works of James Shelby Downard, specifically in his book Carnivals of Life and Death. Downard's writings are notoriously difficult to categorize, occupying a liminal space between memoir, conspiracy theory, occult exegesis, and symbolic storytelling. Yet buried within his accounts is a disturbing episode often referred to as the story of the Centipede Woman. According to Downard, this figure was the result of a clandestine experiment allegedly conducted on Jekyll Island, birthplace of the Federal Reserve banking system. This is aimed at exploring the limits of mind control, biological manipulation, and what he frames as a kind of ritualized transformation. The details are fragmented and surreal, as is typical of Downard's style, but the central image is unmistakable. A human subject altered, invaded, or fundamentally restructured through the introduction of centipede-like organisms. For those unfamiliar, the story that takes place, and this is just one short story amongst a lifelong, just a diary of sorts, if you will, of Downard's life of just absolute insanity. Read the book. I've got another Downard episode in the works now that his new book has come out, but it's a big read, so it's going to take a minute. The new book is called Stalking the Great Whore. So, for those interested, there you go. But yes, there was allegedly an experiment that took place, I believe, in the 1910s or 20s on Jekyll Island. It involved a woman being placed in an electrified cage with a specific species of giant centipedes native to Jekyll Island. Apparently, these same giant centipedes are also native to Florida. Of course, Florida. Add it to the list of horrors. But yes, this woman is placed in an electrified cage with these giant centipedes, and every time that she would exhibit a fear reaction to these centipedes, which, you know, probably nonstop, constant, she would be shocked along with the centipedes. So eventually, through a course of electroshock conditioning inside this electrified cage with these centipedes, this woman sort of, in so many words, developed a weird, I'm not quite sure what the word is, a sort of sympathetic resonance of sorts with these centipedes to where you couldn't tell where she ended and the centipedes began. She would let them crawl all over her afterwards, but essentially she was conditioned into becoming a centipede woman. Like she just, in much the same way, a pet owner let their pets crawl all over them. This woman was doing the same with giant centipedes. It's quite disturbing, especially for those who do not have a fondness for bugs, especially bugs like centipedes, spiders. The more legs a thing has, the less I'm inclined to want to be anywhere near it. Anywho, moving on. So whether taken literally, metaphorically, or as a form of encoded narrative, the imagery is strikingly consistent with the themes already established. The centipede, like the parasite in Burroughs' work, is not merely an external aggressor. It represents a form of internal occupation, a many-segmented invasive intelligence that moves beneath the surface, coordinating action across a distributed system. In Downard's account, the transformation isn't simply physical, it's cognitive. The subject becomes something else. Not entirely human, but not entirely overtaken either. Instead, there's a suggestion of hybridization, of a consciousness that's been partitioned or overwritten by something with its own agenda. This is where the apparent digression begins to fold back into the larger framework, because the centipede is not an arbitrary choice of organism. In traditional Chinese GOO practices, this is the GU version, GOO, which I don't have the etymological evidence to back this up, but it could very well be the origins of the English word goo. It's often described, somewhat reductively, as a form of sorcery or poison magic. The use of venomous creatures such as centipedes, spiders, scorpions, and snakes is central to the practice. These creatures are sealed within a container where they consume one another over time. The survivor, or the resulting substance left over, is believed to concentrate the toxicity, vitality, and spiritual potency of the entire system. The process is not merely chemical, it's symbolic, ecological, and in some interpretations, metaphysical. The GOO, the GU, is thus not a poison, but a composite entity, a distillation of conflict, consumption, and transformation, something that emerges from a closed system of competing organisms, carrying within it the traces of its constituent components. When viewed through this lens, Downard's centipede woman begins to resemble less a bizarre standalone anecdote and more a modern, distorted echo of a much older idea, that identity itself can be destabilized, infiltrated, or reconstituted through exposure to complex biological systems. And here, the parallel to Burroughs becomes difficult to ignore. Just as the quote-unquote black meat in Naked Lunch functions as a vehicle for dependency and control, rewriting the user from within, so too do these insect-based systems, whether literal, ritualized, or allegorical, suggest a model in which the self is not fixed but permeable, something that can be entered, something that can be rewritten, something that can, under the right conditions, cease to belong entirely to itself. Within conspiracy literature, this permeability is often reframed in explicitly technological or experimental terms. Secret programs, isolated facilities, controlled environments like Jekyll Island. But even in these modern retellings, the underlying imagery remains ancient. Containers, creatures, consumption, transformation. And at the center of it all, the persistent idea that what appears to be a substance or an organism is in fact something closer to a process that consumes, integrates, and ultimately redefines its host. Which brings us back once again to the GOO, G-O-O, GOO. Because whether it appears as a viscous black liquid, a parasitic drug, a swarm of venomous insects, or a semi-mythological experiment in human alteration, the pattern remains consistent. It's never just matter. It's always something that changes the rules of the system it enters, and something that, once introduced, is very difficult to fully remove. So before shifting gears into our next aspect of exploration into the black goo phenomena, we quickly need to examine the medieval intersection betwixt medicine and demonology. In the medieval and early Renaissance worldview, the boundary between what we would now call disease and what was understood as spiritual affliction was not merely blurred, it was, in many cases, functionally non-existent. The human body was not conceived of as a closed biological system, but a permeable vessel situated within a cosmos teeming with unseen influences, whether they are divine, demonic, astral, elemental, etc. So within this framework, the idea that an external force could enter the body, alter behavior, and degrade physical health didn't belong exclusively to either medicine nor demonology. It belonged to both simultaneously. Medical theory during much of the medieval period was still heavily influenced by Galenic humoralism, which held that health depended on the balance of four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Illness in this model arose from imbalance. However, this imbalance did not have to originate internally. It could be triggered by environmental factors, corrupted air or miasma, astrological configurations, or, critically, malevolent spiritual entities. Thus, the presence of something foreign within the body, whether conceptualized as excess bile or an invasive spirit, was already structurally embedded into medical thinking of the time. At the same time, theological and demonological traditions were developing increasingly detailed accounts of possession. By the late medieval period, possession was often described in terms that are strikingly physiological. A demon didn't simply influence the soul from afar. It entered the body, occupied it, and in some accounts moved within it. Symptoms attributed to possession, such as convulsions, vomiting, altered speech, or extreme behavioral shifts, overlap significantly with what we might now recognize as neurological disorders, toxic exposure, or infection. This overlap created a shared descriptive language between physicians and exorcists, even if their explanatory frameworks differed. The work of Paracelsus is particularly important in understanding how these domains began to interweave in more complex ways during the early 16th century. Paracelsus rejected strict adherence to classical humoral theory and instead proposed that diseases could be caused by external agents, what he sometimes described as seeds, quote-unquote seeds of disease, or semina morborum. These were not microbes in the modern sense, but they functioned as conceptual precursors to the idea of infection, invisible, invasive entities that could enter the body and propagate within. What's especially notable is that Paracelsus did not draw a hard line between these disease seeds and spiritual or demonic forces. In his writings, one finds references to entities that inhabit the body in ways that are at once biological and spiritual. He also developed the concept of quote-unquote elementals, beings associated with earth, air, fire, and water, that could interact with humans, sometimes beneficially, sometimes harmfully. While not demons in the strictly theological sense, these entities occupied a similar conceptual space: invisible, autonomous, capable of entering or influencing the human body. Paracelsus also introduced the idea that certain diseases might arise from what we would now call parasitic processes, though he described them in terms that blended natural philosophy with occult theory. For instance, he wrote of internal worms, or living agents that could generate illness, not merely as byproducts of decay, but as active participants in the disease process. In some interpretations, these internal agents behaved almost like independent organisms, consuming or altering the host from within. And this is where the conceptual overlap becomes particularly striking. The same descriptive framework used for worms, parasites, or disease seeds could also be applied to demonic entities. Elsewhere in medieval medical and quasi-medical texts, one finds references to conditions involving infestation, both literal and metaphorical. The phenomenon of worms within the body was widely accepted, though poorly understood. Intestinal parasites were real and observable, but their behavior and origin were often interpreted through a symbolic or moral lens. In some cases, these worms were seen as manifestations of corruption, decay, or even sin. The idea that something living could inhabit the body and feed upon it from within resonated deeply with theological notions of possession and moral degradation. Demonological texts, meanwhile, sometimes describe possession in terms that echoed parasitism. A demon might feed, quote-unquote feed, on the host, derive sustenance from their suffering, or gradually weaken them over time. The host's loss of agency, one of the defining features of possession, mirrored the way a parasitic organism commandeers the resources of its host. So in both cases, the afflicted individual becomes, in a sense, a vessel for another form of life or will. What emerges from this overlap is not confusion, but a kind of dual aspect model, a single phenomenon. Say a person exhibiting violent convulsions and speaking in unfamiliar voices could be interpreted simultaneously as a medical condition and a spiritual invasion. A physician might attempt to restore humoral balance or expel internal corruption, while a priest might perform an exorcism. These approaches were not necessarily seen as contradictory. They addressed different dimensions of the same underlying reality. This dual framework allowed for a flexible understanding of illness that could accommodate both observable symptoms and metaphysical explanations. It also meant that the body was never entirely one's own. It was always vulnerable to intrusion by substances, by organisms, or by spirits. The distinction between these categories was less important than the shared idea of invasion and occupation. So in this sense, medieval and early Renaissance thought provides a conceptual bridge between ancient notions of spiritual possession and modern understandings of infection and parasitism. The language has changed, and the explanatory mechanisms have become more precise, but the underlying intuition remains recognizable, that something external can enter the body, alter its function, and, in doing so, blur the boundary between self and other. And it's precisely within that blurred boundary that both demonology and early medicine found common ground. Historically, before the scientific distinction between biology and spirituality, there was a unified theory that sin, parasites, and sentient fluids were interconnected. This concept is exemplified in the ancient Chinese Taoist tradition of the San Shi, or three worms. These aren't literal worms in the modern sense, but supernatural parasites described as dark, shadowy entities residing within the human body. These sentient spies act as celestial informants during specific lunar cycles. They ascend to the heavens to report the host's sins to the gods, thereby shortening their lifespan as divine punishment. The body, in this view, is a compromised vessel, its inner fluids a medium for espionage. To combat this, Taoists practice BOOLAGOO, or grain avoidance, a form of ascetic fasting designed to starve these worms and purify the internal fluids. Failure to do so resulted in the internal essence, the very life force of the body, turning into a black, putrid death sludge, leading to internal decay and eventual death. The corruption was spiritual, but its manifestation was biological and oily. A closely related and far more malevolent tradition is found in the aforementioned Chinese GOO sorcery, GOO, and its Japanese counterpart, Kodoku. This is the potential origin point of the concept of the weaponized black goo. The practice involves a ritual of entropic cruelty, placing venomous creatures such as centipedes, snakes, scorpions, and spiders into the sealed jar to devour each other until only one survives. The last creature, having absorbed the essence of all the others, is a vessel of concentrated poison. The sorcerer then extracts a black oily venom from this survivor, a substance believed to be sentient and parasitic in itself. This venom was used as a potent curse or enchantment, making the victim physically dependent upon it. The victim would waste away without it, but with it, they were enslaved to the sorcerer's will. Withdrawal from the substance caused the victim to wither and die, as if being consumed from within. This is one of the earliest descriptions in history of parasitic colonization and engineered addiction, a dark alchemy that creates life from death and servitude from power. It's critical to note that the correct terminology here, the Japanese term Kodoku, Kodoku, directly derived from the Chinese GOO, Gu. The character GOO, Gu, is visually potent. It represents a jar containing 3 worms or insects, symbolizing the process of venomous creatures devouring each other within a container to produce a sentient toxin. The term Kudoku, Kudoku, is entirely unrelated and means merit or pious act. This distinction is vital as it highlights the precision with which these ancient concepts must be approached. The language itself carries the intent. One is a path to holiness, the other to damnation through poison. Primary historical sources provide chilling details of these practices. The 4th century text Soshinji, In Search of the Supernatural, details GOO practitioners, GU practitioners, and the biological oily residues of their sorcery. It includes stories of humans whose bodies become unnaturally cold and oily to the touch, while their heads are said to detach at night and roam freely before returning mysteriously to their bodies by dawn. The Bin Kao Gangmu, written in 1578 and featured previously in my medicinal cannibalism episode, is a comprehensive pharmacopoeia that treats goo poisoning as a legitimate medical diagnosis, with symptoms including black vomit, resembling rotten cotton or strange fibers. Parallels to modern descriptions of Morgellons disease are rather uncanny. Japanese literature, such as the 12th century Konjaku Monogatari Shu, contains numerous Kodoku tales, including rituals producing a black liquid that brings immense wealth to its owner at the cost of their own children's lives, reflecting the Faustian parasitic nature of the goo, GOO, and GU. The Ingishiki, a 10th century book of laws and customs, includes official purification rituals specifically designed to counter Kodoku, demonstrating the historical fear and institutional response to such black magic. In medieval Europe, between the 1400s and 1700s, medical and religious authorities struggled to differentiate between biological parasites and demonic possession. The line was non-existent. The prevailing vermin theory held that foul bodily humors, such as black bile, could spontaneously generate worms, toads, or insects if a person was sinful or cursed. The body's corruption was a direct reflection of the soul's. Exorcism accounts from this era frequently mention victims vomiting black, tarry bile or expelling oily needles, sometimes even live toads, which were interpreted as a physical manifestation of the demonic presence being driven out. The concept of a worm of conscience, quote-unquote worm of conscience, was not a metaphor. People genuinely believed a black worm resided in the heart or the brain, feeding on the soul's transgressions. Medical treatments of the time, which involved brutal purging and bloodletting, were early attempts to rid the body of this sentient sludge, to physically cleanse the soul by cleansing the blood. This ancient and medieval lore finds its most esoteric modern interpreter in the writings of Kenneth Grant, a figure who built a direct bridge between these old sorceries and the high strangeness of UFOs and extra-dimensional entities. Grant's work on the cult of the Goo is central to this narrative. He describes the cult of the Goo as a secretive Chinese tradition involving female demons and sorceresses who harvest biological essences, or kalas, K-A-L-A-S, into a black oily substance that acts as a gateway for extra-dimensional entities known as the Outer Ones. This substance, described as a slow-working venom that turns blood to ink, parallels the black syrup of abduction lore and represents a demonic frequency replacing the human soul. If you're looking for specific alien abduction accounts that feature a black goo or syrup being administered to the abductee, look at the Betty Andreasen or Betty Luca case. That's one of the rare instances where this syrupy black liquid is not necessarily negative, but administered as a sort of consciousness-altering drug to help facilitate the act of abduction. You can also look at the Coronado group abduction that occurred in the early 1990s, where several people were abducted at once from a hotel in the Coronado area of California. A strange story, seeing as Bill Clinton was also staying at this same hotel when these abductions occurred. But this black goo, as far as its appearance in alien abduction and encounter stories, is strange. It's got a very multifaceted use or existence to it. The Flatwoods Monster incident. Witnesses of the monster incident, like when the monster was seen, the people who encountered it said that they noticed there was a black goo residue surrounding the area where the monster or entity, the creature itself, had passed through, as well as in the area where its ship had allegedly crashed. People who later explored the crashed ship area, quote unquote, also claimed that there was a black oily residue found there. There's also the case of the Murchison meteorite. This is a 1969 case, in which a meteorite landed in Australia and is considered the quote-unquote holy grail for black goo phenomena researchers. Researchers like Harold Kautz-Vela, who I mentioned in the previous black goo episode, he is, for all intents and purposes, the leading black goo phenomena researcher. He argues that certain meteorites aren't just rocks, but hardware, quote-unquote hardware, carrying black goo as the software. When these meteorites hit a planet, the goo leaches into the crust, acting as a planetary nervous system or biological terraforming agent. A more recent event occurs in Costa Rica in 2019, where a meteorite hit a house and witnesses described a strong, pungent smell of, quote, pickles and burnt chemicals, unquote, and a dark, sooty interior that looked like solidified oil. As far as the black goo phenomenon appearing in further alien abduction cases, look at the case of Betty and Barney Hill, in which Barney noted that the leader, quote-unquote, of these entities seemed to be looking through something. Now, the black eyes of the gray aliens are probably their most notorious feature, and Bob Lazar has apparently commented on how when he was working at S4, aka Area 51, he was introduced to documents claiming that these EBEs, or extraterrestrial biological entities, actually had eyes much closer to our own, but they wore a sort of symbiotic liquid black technology over their eyes, both to protect them from the sun, as well as provide some heads-up display, or HUD, much like Terminator vision or Predator vision. There are numerous accounts of what are known as MILABs, or MELABs, short for military abductions, and in the instances of these military abductions, people have seen vats of this chemical in which aliens or hybrids were introducing quote-unquote organic components, i.e. Human limbs, or the contents extracted during cattle mutilation incidents, as well as apparently plunging people into tubes or vats or tanks of this black goo substance. Some people have reported that they've allegedly been able to breathe while recounting their abduction experiences after they'd been immersed within this goo. So this stuff shows up quite a bit throughout abduction literature. So returning to Kenneth Grant. Grant situates the cult of the Goo within the Draconian or Ophidian tradition, tracing its lineage through various global occult practices that venerate the serpent as a symbol of wisdom and forbidden knowledge. He interprets the ritualized production of the black goo as a means to create a physical shadow twin or sentient oil clone of the self, effectively enabling the sorcerer to transcend human limitations and achieve a form of immortality through a parasitic double. Before continuing on with Grant's work and interpretations taken from the Typhonian tradition, we need to explore the tangential relationship that exists between serpents and worms, as well as quickly examining the meaning of the term Typhonian. The term Typhonian, as it appears in occult and esoteric discourse, derives from the figure of Typhon, a monstrous entity in Greek mythology often described as a vast serpentine force of chaos who opposed the Olympian order. In myth, Typhon is less a character than a principle, an embodiment of primordial disorder associated with storms, subterranean fire, and the raw, untamed aspects of nature that resist structure and control. In later occult interpretations, particularly those influenced by the writings of Kenneth Grant, the Typhonian current comes to signify a deeper, more abstract idea, a chthonic or pre-human stream of energy or consciousness that exists beneath or prior to established systems of meaning. It's often linked with liminality, transformation, and contact with forces that are neither wholly material nor entirely symbolic. Within this framework, the Typhonian becomes less about a single mythological being and more about a category of experience, one that involves intrusion, mutation, and the breakdown of conventional boundaries between the self and other, order and chaos, the known and the unknowable. Across much of ancient and pre-modern symbolic thought, serpents and worms were not strictly interchangeable, but they did occupy a shared conceptual territory that made them functionally adjacent in many contexts. The distinction between them, as we understand it today in biological terms, was far less important than their behavioral and visual similarities. Both were elongated, limbless, or seemingly so, and associated with the ground, decay, and hidden spaces, and both could appear suddenly from within the earth or the body. Because of this, they were often grouped together within a broader symbolic category of chthonic or underworld creatures, beings connected to the unseen, the subterranean, and the processes of transformation. In many ancient languages and cosmologies, the same or closely related terms could refer to snakes, worms, or even dragons. In Mesopotamian context, for example, serpentine beings could range from literal snakes to vast mythological creatures of chaos, while smaller worm-like entities were associated with decay and the consumption of the dead. This distinction was one of scale and power, not fundamental nature. Similarly, the ancient Greeks thought the word drakon could refer to a serpent, a dragon, or any large, fearsome serpentine entity, while worms were understood as lesser but still symbolically potent creatures of the earth and corruption. Both were tied to the idea of something that moves beneath the surface, whether that surface is soil, skin, or reality itself. In Egyptian cosmology, the great serpent Apophis, or Apep, represented chaos and the ever-present threat to cosmic order, while smaller worm-like creatures were associated with decay and the underworld. Though not identical, they participated in the same symbolic economy, beings that consume, undermine, and exist outside the ordered world of light and structure. The difference, again, was one of magnitude. Apophis as cosmic adversary, worms as the quiet, inevitable agents of decomposition. What becomes particularly interesting is how this symbolic overlap manifests in medical and spiritual frameworks. As mentioned earlier, medieval and early medical texts often describe internal afflictions in terms of worms inhabiting the body. These were not always literal parasites as we would define them today, but conceptual agents of corruption. At the same time, serpents were frequently used in religious and mythological language to describe deception, intrusion, and transformation. In some cases, the two begin to blur. A worm within the body could take on serpentine qualities in its behavior or symbolism, while a serpent could be described as something that infiltrates or coils within, much like a parasite. In certain strands of Gnostic and early Christian thought, this overlap becomes even more pronounced. The serpent in the garden is not merely an external tempter, but is sometimes interpreted in later esoteric readings as a force that enters into human consciousness, altering perception and knowledge from within. Meanwhile, the worm that dieth not, quote-unquote, worm that dieth not, referenced in biblical texts becomes a symbol of ongoing internal torment, something that persists, consumes, and cannot be expelled. Both images describe a form of internalized otherness, a presence that inhabits and transforms. Quick aside, one of the sources I used to research much of this is the Joshua Cutchin book, A Trojan Feast. Now, I've mentioned Joshua Cutchin several times on this show. He's one of my favorite authors, a hell of a fucking researcher. I highly recommend checking out his work. But this book, A Trojan Feast, examines the reoccurring motif of food, drink, and medicinal offerings made to humans by non-human entities during encounters. He goes all the way back into fairy lore. He researches cryptid lore, all the way into contemporary abduction and contactee literature. So all throughout these narratives is this recurring theme that anytime that you are offered food, drink, or medicine from these entities, the outcome is not always the same. But in most situations, whether it be mythological or like fairy folklore, once you've eaten the food, then you are basically stuck in the other realm, or you're altered irrevocably from your normal human self. You're basically altered into a way that you can forever perceive these beings, which eventually sort of isolates you from your surrounding human community. Taking this motif way back and looking at it in the biblical context of the tree of knowledge, of life and death, the apple, I don't know, it's very strange to put it that way because, I don't know, it's sort of, humanity became trapped in this realm of consciousness, of awareness of life and death, etc. But, anywho, I highly recommend checking out any of Joshua Cutchin's books. They are freaking awesome. And they have the 2 thumbs up seal of approval from this podcast, as well as any other paranormal researcher looking to delve further into various subjects of this nature. So, back to the goo. Chinese traditions involving goo, GU, the poison, further illustrate this conceptual blending. The creatures used in goo rituals, such as snakes, centipedes, worms, and other venomous organisms, are not sharply distinguished in symbolic terms. What matters is their shared capacity for toxicity, concealment, and transformation through consumption. The resulting substance, the goo itself, GU itself, you know what, pretty much goo, GU, and black goo, or GOO, they're kind of interchangeable at this point, I'll say. So it'll help me, keep me from having to delineate at every point. Anyway, it's often described as having a kind of agency, as if the individual organisms have merged into a single, more potent entity. So here again, the distinction between worm and serpent collapses into a broader category of invasive, transformative life. Even in Indo-European myth, more broadly, dragons, often depicted as massive serpents, are sometimes described in ways that echo parasitic behavior. They guard hordes, dwell underground, and in some stories, poison or corrupt the land around them. The Old English word worm, with a Y, for instance, can refer to a worm, a serpent, or a dragon, depending on context. This linguistic fluidity reflects a deeper symbolic continuity. All are expressions of a single underlying idea, differentiated primarily by scale and narrative role. So while serpents and worms were not identical in ancient thought, they were frequently treated as variations on a theme. Both represented forms of life that challenge boundaries between surface and depth, self and other, life and decay. Both could be agents of transformation, whether destructive or regenerative. And both were understood less as discrete biological categories and more as manifestations of a shared symbolic logic, that something small, hidden, and sinuous can enter a system, whether it be a body, a landscape, or the cosmos, and fundamentally alter it from within. In that sense, the interchangeability is not literal but conceptual. They belong to the same family of ideas, one that persists precisely because it captures something deeply intuitive about how humans have long understood intrusion, change, and the unsettling presence of life where it's not expected to be. So returning to Grant, he further links the cult of the Coup to the fictional works of Sax Rohmer, particularly the character of the insidious Dr. Fu Manchu and his associate Sin Sinhua. Grant interprets Rohmer's tales of opium dens and mysterious oriental poisons as allegorical, a fictional veil hiding a deeper truth about the cult's use of addictive black goo substances. Rohmer's depiction of opium and heroin is seen not as a simple crime story, but as coded references to the black goo or coup fluid used in ritualistic and occult contexts to induce the altered states necessary for communication with otherworldly intelligences. The drug is the key, and the addiction is the price of opening the door. To add further weight to this, for those not aware, Sax Rohmer, the literary creator of the insidious Dr. Fu Manchu, was also a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. So, make of that what you will. Within the Typhonian tradition, Grant elaborates on the specific mechanics of this dark alchemy. He describes ritual formulas such as the 7 Kala distillation, where 7 types of biological essences, bodily secretions, excretions, and spiritual emanations are refined into a black tarry state. This process is not for purification, but for creating a magnetic vacuum, a void in reality that attracts and allows for the manifestation of outer intelligences. Rituals involving black mirror scrying, a practice with roots in John Dee's Elizabethan magic, are recontextualized by Grant. He posits that the most effective scryers would anoint the mirror's surface with black oily fluids, using the viscous substance as a tactile and psychic interface to communicate with entities from liminal dimensions. Grant even describes advanced mental techniques of knotting the internal parasites, the sanshi worms, the goo poisons, into a single command consciousness, thereby mastering or transforming the black goo within rather than being consumed by it. He discusses subvocal vibration techniques, specific resonant tones that are said to liquefy astral light into viscous dark matter, effectively manifesting black goo as a tangible presence in a ritual space. Modern authors working in this vein have expanded these ideas into the realm of ufology. Peter Levenda, in his work The Dark Lord, explicitly connects the cult of Coup to UFO phenomena. He proposes a radical reinterpretation of human biology. The body is a container, a coup jar, for extraterrestrial DNA that is dormant within us, attempting to rewrite the genome. Levenda suggests that ancient sorcerers and modern alien abductors use identical techniques, poisons, and syrups to bypass the conscious mind and its defenses, directly manipulating the host's cellular processes. The goal is the same, to activate a non-human potential. In online discussions of a concept known as Typhonian teratomas, advanced by various trans-Yogothian-styled chaos magicians, the black goo is explored as a sentient cancer. It's a biological glitch resulting from a failed or incomplete integration between these extra-dimensional energies and human biology. These teratomas, a medical term for tumors containing different types of tissue, i.e. hair, teeth, eyes, etc., are reimagined as monstrous growths of cryptids, representing macro-scale tumors or sentient oil that have broken free from their human host. This goo as cancer metaphor is a powerful and recurring one. It reframes the substance not as a simple virus aiming to kill the host, but as a cancer seeking to rebuild or transform the host into something new. Some traditions, particularly those on the left-hand path, view the goo as a liberation agent. It dissolves the ego and the limitations of the physical form to enable rebirth into a higher state of being, although most who attempt this process perish in the transition. The benefits attributed to goo infection are legendary, such as multidimensional sight, supernatural powers, and even a form of twisted immortality. These come at the absolute cost of losing human form, sanity, and autonomy. You gain the universe, but you lose yourself. Kenneth Grant draws further parallels between this terrestrial black goo and what he calls star slime, or the folkloric phenomena known as powder serre. This is the gelatinous substance often reported in fields after meteor showers, a foul-smelling star jelly that is said to cause grotesque mutations in plants and animals before mysteriously evaporating. This slime is seen as a liquid manifestation of cosmic will, a Stygian substance that leaks into our atmosphere from interstellar space and interacts with earthly biology. The black goo in this context functions as a cancer-like agent from the stars, hijacking cellular instructions and manifesting as shadow beings, fungal infestations, or oily phantoms. Ancient detection methods for these substances were as esoteric as the goo itself. Texts mention using rhino horn or silver needles to test for the presence of sentient toxins in food or drink, while polished black mirrors were said to reveal the true, terrifying form of a goo-infected entity, stripping away its human camouflage. Just as an aside, I believe Kenneth Grant also says these goo sorcerers can shapeshift into a sort of miniature UFO form. I'd have to go back and read Cults of the Shadow again, but I'm pretty sure he mentions that. It's very strange. Menacing or fear-inducing orbs of light. Mysterious will-o'-the-wisps, things of that nature. Anywho, ancient and medieval beliefs about celestial slime or star rot provide a deep historical context for this cosmic connection. Medieval naturalists regarded meteor showers not as rocks burning up in the atmosphere, but as the stars expelling waste-like humors, a celestial excrement. Sky poop. In Germanic folklore, this is called Sternschat, or star water, described as a foul-smelling gelatin that dissolved on contact with the ground. The great alchemist Paracelsus considered this to be Gnostic, N-O-S-T-O-C, a raw universal spirit matter or alchemical prima materia that had descended to Earth. He saw it as being in the negretto or black phase of the alchemical transformation, a dangerous and unrefined substance that caused wasting diseases and madness in those who came near it. Celtic folklore associates star rot with night hags and celestial parasites that fell from the sky to cause mutations in livestock, while Greek mythology describes ichor, I-C-H-O-R, the ethereal fluid that flowed in the veins of the gods themselves, as well as lympha, a madness-inducing fluid linked to star blood. Eastern traditions have an equally rich lore of celestial fallout. Star rot is often viewed as flesh of the stars or earth meat. In Chinese folklore, the Tai Sui is a prime example. It's believed to be a pulsating amorphous black mass that resides underground, embodying a sentient tumor linked to cosmic cycles and earthly health. Disturbing the ground where a tai sui resides is believed to bring plagues, financial ruin, or a black rot that afflicts entire families. Japanese Heian era accounts describe star blood, red and black jellies that appeared after meteor showers. Contact with these substances caused scaly skin afflictions and were believed to be the residue from celestial battles between gods or demons. Tibetan and Indian lore speak of a dark, unrefined shadow Amrita, consumed by demonic entities. While the true Amrita grants enlightenment and immortality, this shadow version grants invulnerability but twists the consumer's heart, turning it black. They also speak of black smoke falling from the stars that, when it settles, causes monstrous births and genetic aberrations. In medieval and early modern exorcism traditions, the physical expulsion of demons was believed to be accompanied by the ejection of a black, tarry bile or oily needles. This was seen as the material residue of the spiritual darkness being purged. The demon wasn't just an idea, it had a physical, oily presence. Incubi and succubi, the demons of sexual nightmares, were believed to produce cold, dark, oily fluids during their sexual assaults, a substance lacking life's vital spark, representing a vampiric theft of essence. Kenneth Grant's occult writings describe kalas, secretions from sex magic rituals that, if not properly handled, degrade into black, oily substances. These substances can act as gateways, attracting and anchoring otherworldly entities to the practitioner. This lore finds a modern echo in ufology. UFO landing sites or saucer nests have frequently been associated with black oily residues. In the famous Tully saucer nest case in Australia, the flattened circular reeds were accompanied by a foul-smelling black scum. In other cases, like the Langenberg, Saskatchewan black powder incident, a fine, soot-like black material was found after a close encounter. These substances are said to chemically alter the plants and soil, leaving behind a trace of something not of this earth. I believe there's also several incidents of, this is an aside, but I believe there's also several incidents of religious idols, such as the Virgin Mary, certain Hindu gods, crying black, oily liquids. Very strange. The evolution from exorcism residue to UFO-related black goo illustrates a clear continuum. It's the same archetypal substance manifesting through different cultural and technological lenses. The black bile of medieval demonology turns into the ectoplasmic slime of 19th century spiritualism, and finally into the black goo of modern ufology. This substance acts as a shadow matter, a physical medium that bridges human reality with other non-human realms. The presence of black mold, specifically Stachybotrys chartarum, in so-called haunted locations introduces a purely biological dimension to black goo lore. Toxic black mold produces mycotoxins that can cause severe neurological symptoms, including memory loss, anxiety, and hallucinations. It can also create sensations of an oppressive presence or being watched. Some theorists propose that black mold acts as a biological frequency jammer, altering brainwave patterns and facilitating the perception of shadow beings or entities that are always present but normally unseen. Folklore has long attributed sentience or curses to fungi, seeing them as earthly intelligences. This parallels black goo as biological intelligence that influences human health and perception from the inside out. Certain cryptids, such as the Honey Island swamp monster or the slime man of the Pacific Northwest, are consistently associated with black, oily, or gelatinous residues that emit strange chemical odors, linking these legendary creatures to the same black goo reports found in occult and UFO literature. Bringing the narrative into the present day, recent discoveries provide a startling potential bridge between folklore and modern biology. I believe I brought this up briefly in the first black goo episode, but Ship Goo 1. The Ship Goo 1 substance, found in 2025 on a research vessel in Cleveland, Ohio, was initially dismissed as industrial pollution. However, analysis revealed it to be a previously unknown biological organism thriving in a highly toxic, low-oxygen environment. More disturbingly, it contained novel DNA sequences that did not match any known terrestrial taxonomy. This discovery of a sentient black slime existing in an industrial setting, a modern cauldron, serves as a powerful contemporary footnote, suggesting that the line between ancient myth and biological reality may be far thinner than we care to admit. It's a real-world echo of the star slime and alchemical sludge of old. Collectively, these narratives and research strands form a complex, multi-layered framework in which black goo represents a sentient, parasitic, and transformative substance with biological, technological, metaphysical, and physiological dimensions. It's a phenomenon that refuses to be categorized. In John Dies at the End, it's the soy sauce, a street drug to another reality. In ancient China, it was the goo, G-U, a sorcerous poison for control and assassination. In medieval Europe, it was the black bile of sin and demonic possession. In the occult cosmology of Kenneth Grant, it's the kalas, a gateway fluid for extra-dimensional invasion. In ufology, it's the alien oil left behind in saucer nests, or a tool for genetic and mental manipulation. The black goo is simultaneously an ancient archetype, a modern conspiracy element, and a symbol of profound transformation and control. It's the ultimate invasive species, a substance that offers godlike power in exchange for one's humanity. It's the fear that our own bodies, our very blood and bile, can be turned against us by an intelligence older and colder than we can imagine. Whether it's a literal extraterrestrial pathogen, a misunderstood biological phenomenon, or a powerful psychological metaphor for addiction and spiritual corruption, the black goo endures because it touches upon a fundamental human terror, the fear of losing control, of being hollowed out and replaced by something other. It's the shadow substance that waits in the dark, not just in the world, but within us, promising everything and demanding everything in return. The investigation continues. I got a big list of sources here. So, for the occult and Typhonian current, check out Kenneth Grant, Cults of the Shadow. This is the main source for the Cult of the Coup and the 17th Kala, as well as the connection between sexual alchemy and extraterrestrial leakage. We'll go with the word leakage. That works. Kenneth Grant, Hecate's Fountain, talks about the Mauve Zone, star slime, as well as the manifestation of dark fluids during sex magic ritual work. Michael Bertiaux, I think that's how you say it, the Voodoo Gnostic Workbook, or a Voudon Gnostic Workbook, talks about liquid machines and black snake energy. For ancient Taoist alchemy, you have The Religious Systems of China, Volume 4. This is the definitive academic study on the black magic known as Koo, or Goo. The Sushin Ji, mentioned earlier, the Encyclopedia of Taoism, Science and Civilization in China, Volume 5, Part 5. The article Catch a Falling Star in the Folklore Journal, 1984. This is a comprehensive look at the powder serre, or star jelly phenomenon. The Archidoxis, or Archidoxis of Magic by Paracelsus. It's a 16th century source for Nostoc, N-O-S-T-O-C, and the alchemical properties of star sludge. Very interesting. Gerald of Wales, The Journey Through Wales, talks about historical accounts of star rot affecting livestock and acting as an omen of sorts. Jacques Vallée, Messengers of Deception. This is it talks briefly about some of the goo residue concepts. Dr. Carla Turner, Into the Fringe, and Taken were primary sources for my lab military abduction accounts involving black ooze and vats of fluid. Jerome Clark, the UFO Encyclopedia, says detailed logs on the Tully saucer nest and the Langenberg black powder cases. Harold Kautz Vela, Dangerous Imagination, Silent Assimilation. This is a modern synthesis of black goo, AI, and Morgellons phenomenon. Then you have, of course, Naked Lunch, John Dies at the End, and the insidious Dr. Fu Manchu. I think I mentioned all of those previously. But yeah, some of those first ones I mentioned, man, if you can make your way through any Kenneth Grant book, I highly suggest you do. It's very annoying when he goes off into the Kabbalistic, wordplay. This word equals this number, and this number equals these words. I don't know. I don't put a lot of stock into Kabbalism. I don't know why. It just never resonated with me. I find it, I don't know, obsessive compulsive in a way. So my entire life I've played, license plate number games or, the whole 23 phenomena, etc. It strikes me as just a continuation of that. But I don't discount that it has certain inherent energies or whatever to it. If it works for you, it works, and that's all that matters. So, but yes, Kenneth Grant's Typhonian trilogies are a massive storehouse of weird shit. So I'm going to, in future episodes coming up soon, I've got a few that I've got like several I'm juggling and jumping back and forth between different projects at the moment. Some of the concepts we touched on today are going to get a further explanation and exploration in upcoming future episodes. Some of it actually kind of has me scared. Not scared. I don't know. I just paranoid, I guess. I don't know. Done some weird things happen lately. Just, I don't know. I keep hearing like whistling. Or like, not quite whistling. I don't know how to explain it. Whistling will work for now, for lack of a better word. But I hear it like in the room with me late at night. Like when everyone's asleep and it's dark and quiet. And I hear like this. I don't want to like try to imitate it because I don't know. I'm kind of like freaked out to maybe do that. But I keep hearing like this woo woo. I know it sounds woo woo. How ironic. But yeah, I keep hearing this weird noise out of nowhere. Inside the house, as well as outside. Yeah, I don't know. Hopefully it's nothing. Hopefully it's just my imagination running wild with me. I don't know. But I'm pretty immersed in some weird literature, and that's probably just influencing my brain and thought process. Anywho, that's going to do it for today's episode. I had to cut some stuff. Let me look at my notes here just real quick. Yeah, also check out Joshua Cutchin's work. Holy shit. I can't recommend his books enough. According to Harold Kautz-Vela, the top Black Goo researcher guy, allegedly the Falkland Islands War of 1982 was actually a cover story for what is known as a quote-unquote goo grab. That's how he put it, I guess. The British military discovered a sentient, intelligent black oil on Thule Island, or Thule Island, the South Sandwich Islands. Too many jokes to pull up at once. The substance is described as a high-density, programmable matter containing its own DNA-like instructions. And it was allegedly salvaged from an ancient crashed craft or prehistoric biological computer. The goo was taken back to the UK, to Marconi Labs. Now, for those who know their conspiracy lore and history, there is a string of suspicious deaths or quote-unquote suicides of scientists related to Marconi Labs. I think I talked about it a little bit like way back in like one of the first episodes we did of this show of like, I think it was in one of the Nikola Tesla episodes or something, but just in itself, a very odd story. It's usually, most of these mysterious deaths are equated with working on the Star Wars defense system under President Reagan. Let's see, what else did I have here? There's also the Alicante incident in Spain. This is more of a localized leak story involving a black goo facility in Spain. Reports surfaced of a massive underground reservoir of this oil-like substance near Alicante. There's connection to phantom black dogs and hellhounds. A lot of these phantom black dog encounters, allegedly these black dogs have been seen coated in some kind of oily type substance, as well as the kelpies of Scottish myth. Kelpie or water horse is like a malevolent spirit that lures people into the water. It has adhesive skin, so once you touch it, you're stuck to it by a black oily secretion, and then it drags you into the water. This sort of mirrors modern reports where the substance of the black goo is said to be magnetic or sticky to human touch. There's various weeping walls phenomena, like the infield poltergeist or the smurl haunting. Witnesses report a black, foul-smelling, oily ooze coming from the walls or dripping from ceilings. shadow people encounters. I think I kind of mentioned that mostly in the first Black Goo episode. The prevailing theory for most of this is that Black Goo is an AI. The researchers believe the substance is a sentient nanotechnology that arrived on Earth via a meteorite, much like the aforementioned Murchison meteorite, which contained complex amino acids. They argue that this goo is actually an ancient AI that is slowly infecting or possibly upgrading human consciousness through the abductions and ingestion cases mentioned earlier. Cryptozoologist Ivan T. Sanderson, as well as Charles Fort, have posited that this black goo is the carcasses or remains of various atmospheric intelligences or animals, atmospheric jellyfish or sky beasts, etc., low-density biological organisms that live and die in the upper atmosphere. When these creatures die, their bodies lose structural integrity, decoherence, and fall to Earth as star jelly. There's also several strange blob encounters. There's the 1950 Philadelphia blob case. 2 police officers saw a 6-foot pulsating mass of sticky, translucent sky jelly land in a field. When they touched it, it dissolved into a sticky, odorless residue. This became the direct inspiration for the movie The Blob, based on a true story. There's also the Oakville blobs of 1994. In Oakville, Washington, a series of gelatinous blobs fell from the sky instead of rain. While often described as clear, some residents reported darker, murkier iterations of this goo-like substance. This substance was famously, quote-unquote, sentient in its lethality. It contained human white blood cells and 2 types of bacteria, causing flu-like illnesses in the town and killing several pets. There's also the case of the Aguasarcas. I'm not sure if I mentioned this earlier. Let's see, 2019, Costa Rica. Starting to sound like Bob Einstein over here. Jesus. All right, you know what? I gotta give it a go. That's the end of the episode. My voice is giving out on me. I've been yelling at my W2. Thanks for listening, folks. Sorry about my voice. I hope you liked this episode. I found like so much more on black goo phenomena, and I just wanted to put it out there. It is a fascinating topic, and man, I don't know. There's that whole Typhonian sex magic occult angle. Man, I could delve into that stuff all day because it's just so fucking utterly weird. But we'll be returning to that sort of stuff in a not too distant future episode. So yeah, that's gonna do it. I mean it for real this time. This has been Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclasts, a podcast. I'm your host, Michael Lucht, and I will see you folks on the next one. Love you. Stay dry, not goo covered. See ya. Bye.